Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today on this episode of Ancient Near East meets Modern West. I am joined by Jake Baxter, who is known on Instagram as at Dumu.Enki. That's Dumu period Enki. He is a man of many talents, and I'm sure that he will be more than happy to explain his MO, his CV, probably list all of the accomplishments from his resume, as it were. Jake, thank you so much for joining me today.
No problem. Thank you very much for that sparkling introduction.
you didn't have a publicist send me anything, so I figured that I'd have to do the best that I could and just make things up on the fly, which is pretty much what we'll be doing this entire interview because, I'm used to being pretty formulaic with questions and topics, but I'm trying to turn over a new leaf and be a little more spontaneous. So there's that.
I prefer that format, to be fair. Bit of spontaneity. There's nothing wrong with that, so I'm happy with that.
So there's a lot of stuff that we could cover today. One thing that I did want to sort of focus in on first is this absolutely beautiful artwork that you've reproduced over the last few months, probably years. I have some examples here of the tablets that you so lovingly crafted and sent to me. And I understand that your work is largely inspired by what Digital Hammurabi has put forth, whose books are also here behind me.
Yeah. So the scribal aspect of my practice began in sort of the 2020 lockdown period when I purchased the first book, the Learn to Read Ancient Sumerian, the one that's obviously behind you. Um, and I sort of breezed through like the first chapter or two and thought, oh, this is really cool. And then I sort of kind of stopped. I just kind of it's a bit of a brain uh, screwer upper, so to speak. The Sumerian language is extremely hard, so I just kind of set it down, didn't really come back to it. And then post lockdown, when my Mesopotamian polytheistic practice really sort of fired up, so to speak, when it really came to be. I picked the book back up, um, and I've probably gone through that book a few times now, and then went on to the second volume, and I've just recently finished that one as well. And yeah, it did really help when I was doing the scribal aspect. Like, the reason I went on to the scribal aspect was because I believe that the words themselves, when they're imprinted onto the clay, bring a new energy to it, bring a new aspect towards it spiritually for me, which is obviously as close as I can get to how the ancients would have done it as well. Um, so doing that for me sort of brought forth my practice more in a more, you know, in a more spiritual and a more personable way. And I've just been going ever since. It's probably been like maybe a year or so I've been doing it properly. Some of my early attempts are horrible. So not really good.
My attempts are pretty horrible too, which is probably why I don't think of that as a pursuit for myself. I'll stick to just taking inspiration from the text and writing adaptations, but as far as imprinting the cuneiform script into clay, that's not my forte. I should probably be banned from the recon community, but there you have it.
No, of course not. It's I feel like because I there's a lot of things in life that I feel like I would love to be good at, but I'm not good at. So when it came to the religious or spiritual aspect, I felt like when I found the scribal stuff, that did click with me. Like, I do, to a degree, understand the grammar. Like the grammar started to settle in like properly, and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm actually getting this. I'm actually understanding it. I'm actually recognizing things within, the actual literature that we can look at on the sources that we've got. Um, and I just thought, oh my god, this is actually something I can do. So I've like I've got a quite obsessive personality when it comes to learning new things. So I jumped on the Scrabble thing, and it hasn't stopped. Like, it's, if anything, it's gained momentum. Like, I'm building my own small library that will maybe one day rival that of Ashurbanipal. We'll see one day. Um, but yeah, it's really I found it's really special to me, the whole the tablet thing. And it actually, I didn't realize, and people don't realize, that it takes a lot of energy mentally to be able to not only learn it but imprint it correctly, because they didn't have rubbers back then. Like, if you get it wrong, you basically have to start the tablet again, depending on how bad the mistake is. um so yeah, it's a lot of effort and a lot of trial and error, but it's worth it. I mean, as you can see, some of the work behind you is only a few of the many tablets I've done, and they vary in size as well. I've got quite a large one at the side of me here that took probably about an hour to do. Um, but yeah, it's I love it. I really do. It's amazing.
So let's talk about things pre-pandemic, where we we all collectively thought that this was just going to be a passing thing, and then found ourselves locked in our homes for days, weeks, months at a time, with nothing to do other than obsess over things, or in your case, learn a new art. What was your practice, if you will, like before the pandemic? As I understand it, you were not necessarily uh, firmly rooted in the Mesopotamian polytheist community. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. So my journey spiritually has been a very turbulent one, I will say. So pre-pandemic, I was like a Levian Satanist. Pre-pandemic. And there's a reason for that though. Like, obviously, anyone who's listening, or anyone who is familiar with Levian Satanism, it's very atheistic in nature. You hear, well, that's how people put forward that it's very atheistic. And that's, it's kind of stupid to believe in deities in that community that I've come across, which didn't resonate with me, because a lot of the stuff I agreed with, like some of the philosophies, not all of it. Some of it's extremely questionable, but some of it I really got, I understood. Like the kind of sticking up for yourself, making you feel good about yourself, which is something that I struggled to do growing up. So I've resonated with that quite a lot. Um, but I didn't believe, like, did have, like, I'm very theistic, so like that didn't resonate with me, and I wasn't. It just didn't feel right. And even before the Levian Satanism, I was actually what people now call a theistic Satanist. So the whole sort of trying to do rituals to Lucifer and that kind of stuff. But I didn't feel anything. There was no. It was very empty, very, kind of, there was just absolutely nothing behind it. There was no energy transfer. There was no dreams. There was just nothing you would associate with, like, a spiritual experience was there. Um, so I was kind of at a loss. I was kind of thinking, well, maybe there isn't anything. Maybe I am just preaching to the ether here. Um, but then, um, now, again, I'll touch back on this in a second. I don't want to deviate too much off topic. But essentially, I had an epiphany post-pandemic, and the name Enki, as my name would suggest, it kept popping up, and I mean everywhere. Like, I was walking through a department store or a shop in the UK, and there was literally a magazine in a shop called Marks and Spencer's, which is like a really posh food place. And it was like a magazine, an architect magazine called Enki, and I was like, what? Like, I was like, I keep seeing this name everywhere. I'm like, what on earth is going on? Um, and then I just kind of had a blow, like a literal blow. There's that meme when it's that guy going, "Whoa." It's literally like that, like an epiphany. Just then I was like, I need to pursue this path. There's something to this. I need to pursue this. And that's when I locked onto the language, and I just thought, I almost thought the language had a religious experience of its own, just hearing, well, not hearing, but reading the language and seeing it. And I just thought, oh my God, it ties everything together. There's a thing in Satanism called the joy of Satan, which obviously I'm not affiliated with anymore. And anyone again who's listening, do not go with those guys. Not very nice people at the heart of it. But they talk about Enki a lot on their page, on their their forum or whatever. And they talk about the Babylonian things, and I'm sure Enlil's name's mentioned. And so that I was introduced to that mythology very early on. But it only really resonated until, as I've just said, post pandemic, and I can't explain it. But once you have that experience, it doesn't leave you. So yeah, I do still resonate with Satanism in some of the aspects, but not the theistic aspect, of course. But yeah, that essentially sums up my experience with pre-pandemic spirituality.
That's pretty fascinating. I find it interesting when individuals that I become acquainted with have that left hand path or Luciferian or that spiritual background in Satanism, because there's so many intersections, at least based on modern conceptions of deity and symbology and the quote unquote collective consciousness, where there's this attempt, if you will, to look to the distant past for some aspect of truth that resonates with the spiritualist, that says, hey, it's been around much longer than people like Anton LaVey would propose. So I find it fascinating how you've gone from the satanic current or the Luciferian current to this scribal current, and taking the name DumuEnki, which is son of Enki. I find that pretty fascinating. Is there something to that, in the sense that the essence that spiritual essence that you were seeking out in Satanism, is that something that you've found to be realized in your devotional practice with Enki?
Yes. So essentially, um, when when I had the epiphany moment, it was all centered around Enki, and that kind of it, obviously I immediately went and bought. I think a lot of us in the Mesopotamian polytheistic community tend to go to things like Samuel Kramer first of all. It's quite it's quite an easy inward way to the material, isn't it? And I started reading about Enki's myths, essentially, is what I mean. And obviously he's known as like the creator god, like the one of the creators of humanity, and the slaying of the god, and to sacrifice to make human beings, and there's also other little things as well, like obviously he's a god known to do with water or fresh water,
Mm-hmm.
of the Lord of the Abzu and things like that. And obviously, if you think about it scientifically, you don't have life without water, so it all kind of interlinks. And that it all, even things like that, we're all just kind of swirling around in my head, like a like in a film when there's a detective and he's got loads of strings on a board and it's all coming together. Like, it was all just sort of like coming together, and I was like, oh my God, I can't even, my brain's not computing what's going on. So the son of Enki, that name came from, not in like a sort of you know Naram Sin esque, I am the son of a god kind of way, not that kind of way, but more like I am a creation of him.
Mm-hmm.
So we're all sons of Enki, if you like, but it's just the name that I felt really resonated. And I also thought to myself, if I was a Mesopotamian scribe, what would I call myself? And that's what I would call myself, DumuEnki. Um, so yeah, I just kind of linked, and I felt like the relationship, as you sort of mentioned with Enki, is like, um, it became very powerful when I had a dream, And I took to Instagram to tell this dream because I had to get it out because it was so profound, and I've never had a dream like it, and I've never actually had a dream since this, which is probably for the best. But I had a dream, and I was like in water. I was like physically floating in water with no land around me, but the water was like the only way I can describe it was cosmic water. Like it was a greeny blue, like almost like how do you think? I can't even describe it. It was like a spacey green, if you like, or zombie green, I think they call it. I was sort of like bobbing around in this water, and I saw an entity like in front of me, like a black mass, like a terrifying entity, and it had no form. It didn't really have a shape. It was just a sort of mass, and my mind within the dream said it's Enki in my head in the dream. If that makes sense. And it started to approach me, like I could see the water getting darker because it was approaching me. And I literally said in the dream, I have to get out. I have to get out of this. And I woke up. I literally woke up from the dream at that moment, and I wrote it all down. But this was at like 7 in the morning. I'm sweating. I wrote it all down, and I tried to interpret it. I did a tarot reading or an oracle spread to try and interpret the reading. And I think the interpretation that I got was essentially Enki letting me know he's around. But it's also like, it also gave me a thought into how he should actually be viewed, in my opinion. And that is that he is a terrifying being capable of great things and, the world and creation, things like that. But he's also, not to be messed around with, essentially. Like if we were to be in his presence, like I was in his presence in my dream for what, 30 seconds, and I couldn't deal with it. I had to leave. So I can't, yeah. And that feeds into my belief systems, which I'm sure we'll get onto, of how the gods actually look. But yeah, it was so terrifying and profound, and it all this came together. So I think about that when I'm doing my scribal thing, when I'm doing a dedicatory tablet to Enki. These are the things that are going through my head. So it's like I'm trying not to mess the tablet up for that reason. Yeah, it was
That's pretty
terrifying.
fascinating with the visual, because I mean, not to draw focus and toot my own horn, but that's actually a similar experience that I had, that I actually wrote about in my most recent book, where I was in a essentially a watery void, and I go on to write, or what I perceived to be a moving, sentient, yet silent field of darkness which surrounded me on all sides. So
That's
you're
very
not,
similar.
it's incredible that this imagery is pretty consistent. You're not the only one that's told me this. Of course, I had my own experience. Other people have intimated the same thing. So I find it fascinating how, all of these people that are coming into this mode of spirituality, this current of spirituality, all have very similar experiences with the divine. And, again, it's just mind blowing. Absolutely mind blowing.
No, I agree, and it's things like that, like even you just saying that and alluding to the fact that more people have experienced the same thing, is that this adds credence and confirmation to me that that experience was legitimate. Because a lot of people, and I get it, I'm very critical and skeptical of things myself, as one should be, in my opinion. Is I'm very I kind of woke up and thought maybe it was just in my head. Maybe I was just kind of thinking about things. Maybe blah blah blah. That 101 experience, like excuses, but it felt
Yeah.
so real. It felt so real. And when people say you just know, that was it. I just knew that's not like a dream I've ever had before, nor have I ever had again. I've not had that dream since. So I don't know. Like, and the fact that, again, you just said that, it all. I'm constantly my mind's constantly confirming that experience was legitimate, basically.
So you had mentioned your perception of the deities, and how
Mm.
you I guess envision them to look, or how your mind perceives them. I was wondering if perhaps you could elaborate on that as well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, um, as you're aware, the Sumerians or Mesopotamians in general, of course, depicted their gods basically looking like their kings. You know, the beard and the regalia, the the toga esque sort of tunics, and the horned helms, the horned caps, which was basically what their their kings look like, right? You know, that's essentially what they looked like. It was an imagery of them, which makes total sense. And every culture, or most cultures following them, did kind of the same thing. You know, the Egyptian gods, apart from the animalistic features, of course, kind of look like them with the same clothes and the same jewelry, etc. So, what I think, my opinion, is that the gods are something that we can't even compute. They're formless. They are just sort of, it's like air. You can feel the air, but you can't see it. Like it's just sort of there. You know, it's a force. It's something that human beings have tried since the dawn to try and conceptualize in their own way to get their heads around it, because otherwise they'll go mad. You know, they can't conceptualize it. So it's easy for them to make it look like they're kings, or a bit, you know, make it look like them. In obviously in the Mesopotamian mythology, you've got the gods like Enki, and Ninmah sort of getting drunk together and making people willy-nilly, like under the influence, like, you know, making mistakes like humans, drinking beer like humans. They're humanizing something in a way to conceptualize it. But I think the reality of the deities is actually a little bit more terrifying and complex than we could
Mhm.
ever imagine.
I
So
agree.
my answer is I don't know what they look like, but I know it's there, and it's kind of everywhere. Like when I look into the sky, I look out the window now and see the sky. That's them. I look in the water and that's them. The earth, that's them. It's just sort of ingrained in everything that you can see. You just can't see it. It's just something that you can't really give a form. So when people say, like on the internet, "Oh, the gods didn't look like that," oh, well, who knows what they'd look like? We don't know. You know what I mean? So I think they appear to people as the person can conceptualize without going nuts.
Yeah,
Is my opinion,
I
basically.
agree. I
Yeah.
agree. And speaking of depictions, you are also collaborating on a project with the Star of Inanna Tarot.
Mm.
How did that come about? As soon as I saw a post on Instagram, I immediately locked on, and then to find out you're actually in as you're a part of that project, it just blew my mind. I mean, it's just one thing after the other. How did that come about? What was the catalyzing moment that drew you in?
Yeah. So unbelievable. Yeah. So basically, yeah, the Star of Inanna Tarot, they were posting some tarot cards with cuneiform inscriptions. And they wanted to follow the Sumerian Inanna rather than Ishtar, like the sort of the earlier Inanna specific texts and mythology. And I noticed that some of the cuneiform that they were using was basically incorrect, or like it wasn't grammatically correct. They were just kind of putting things next to each other that, knowing Sumerian at the level enough of Sumerian to know that that's not really correct. I reached out to them just to say, hey, I've seen your things. It looks amazing, by the way. Just to let you know, the cuneiform, if you wanted it to say this, I would personally put this, you know, that kind of thing. And then they looked at my page and realized that obviously this is what I do. This is kind of the avenue I take. So they just said, you know, thank you very much. Eventually, they reached out to me and said, look, we've seen you help out on our posts. We've seen what you do. We'd love you to come on board as a cuneiform consultant, essentially, and give us your knowledge. So I jumped in on a call with both of the two people that do it, um, and we just spoke about it for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, and we you know, I help them on specifically the cuneiform, and try. I usually try and get it from a tested text, so it's like legitimate phrasing. So I'm not just
Yeah,
making things up. But I also kind of helped with some of the imagery as well in the later cards, like some of the sort of Utnapishti imagery. You know, so I'll talk about the imagery that I'm aware of based on my experience from the tablets and things like that. So, but you know, it's really just a passion of mine. So I think they saw that I was so passionate about it and wanted me on board, basically.
you have also branched out into film and narration, elaborating upon various figures in Mesopotamian history. Is that something else that you could elaborate on? I find that a pretty fascinating subject to explore as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was noticing that my posts were taking sort of an th- they're kind of coming to a natural head where like a kind of natural end if I carried on doing the same thing. I'd make a tablet with a very basic inscription on, post the translation, done. Um, Maybe I'd post some proverb, like a real proverb from CBLI, the Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative, and I'd kind of leave it there. And I was like, I'm someone who takes pride in their work, like, and I want it to look good. So I thought to myself, my partner, who is also a devotee of Inanna, by the way, is a very talented videographer and editor. That's basically literally what she does for a job. She's got a master's in it. She works for a very large company at the moment. So I thought to myself, you could edit this, and I'm a writer, and I could provide the content historically, of course, and you could turn it into a video. So we did it. And one of the biggest figures, arguably in Mesopotamian history, is Shobanapan, from the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Arguably, in my opinion, one of the most important in things like the library and the artwork, that kind of thing. So I wanted to pour my passion of talking too much and information and history into a video with some really cool imagery. And I like to use real imagery. I like to stay away from AI, artist interpretations at the very least. Sorry, at the very most, and real Mesopotamian art as a baseline, so people can actually see how these people were actually being depicted. Um, and then it just kind of branched off from there. I did one video about the Battle of Tiltuba against the Assyrians and the Elamites of ancient Iran, um, and the artwork for that is absolutely fantastic. By the way, if anyone hasn't seen it, I highly recommend you look at it. Um, and it just kind of went from there. Like, people were really interested, so I did a little bit about Ashurbanipal in general, and Sennacherib and Esarhaddon and all those other big figures that are mentioned biblically as well.
Hmm.
So you get a lot of people jumping onto that because it's fascinating history, and I actually get a lot of interest from modern Iraqis, like people living in Baghdad and things like that, because they're fascinated that I know so much about the ancient culture and the language, and people love it. So I found a new love for it, and I've got quite a few videos now, and I've branched out into mythology and not just the historical aspect of it as well. I think I've got a video on Etana, the king who ascended
Hmm.
to heaven, and I'm just about to film a video tonight, actually, about Lamashtu, obviously the demoness. So yeah, it's I like visuals. I like to mix the content up, essentially.
So you have citizens of Iraq who are coming onto your page and engaging with the dedicated work that you do. Let's change direction there. Have you had any pushback from everyone's favorite field of pseudoscience and pseudohistory, the ancient alien proponents? I fortunately, knock on wood, have not had any instances where the ancient aliens crew decides to hop in and give their 2 cents. But I'm wondering if you have unfortunately been the recipient of that kind of interaction.
Oh, I was limbering up for this one. So I haven't really had any personal Sitchin followers on my content itself, but I am in the sphere online. There is another creator that I speak to quite a lot. His name is King and Corpse on TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
He is fantastic at the language. He's even better than I, simply just because he's been doing it a lot longer. Um, but he gets himself into a lot of arguments with Sitchin. Like, they tend to comment on his stuff and not mine. Um, so I have been in debates online in his comments because he tends to do this similar content to me, where he'll maybe get up an ancient tablet and talk about the history and translate it, and you get a lot of people. He did a video about the name Anunnaki, which is obviously
Mhm.
basically the holy grail to them. These
Yeah.
people, they kind of hone in on that word, don't they? So he did like a linguistic breakdown of the word and what it actually means. And, I would comment on that video and be like, it's lovely to see that someone as myself who breaks it down and gives it the respects, and puts it in the context of the culture that it was written in, that kind of thing. Um, and yeah, people went off in the comments just sort of saying, you know, how do you know Sitchin isn't wrong? And I'm like, I haven't got time to sit and tell you how wrong this man is. Like, he's a great writer, science fiction writer, and there is evidence to suggest that he did study some Sumerian, at least very basically, but only so he could manipulate it into a science fiction story, which is exactly all that it is. So, but I try and use it as like a growing point. Like I couldn't, part of me wants to get really angry and think, right, you just, it's because it's actually quite a racist sentiment, isn't it? If you think about it,
Mhm.
and I've seen a lot of creators talk about it, about how, um, these ancient people, these, primitive people couldn't possibly have created such things. And it's like you you only have to look for 5 minutes to see the amazing things that these people created and set up for us, people today who take it for granted. But anyway, back to the point. So I'll deviate them, or I'll reroute them into, for example, when they talk about Enki wanting us as human beings to be created to mine gold and all that absolute heresy, I will go take, I'll recommend Atrahasis, for example, and just say, have a read of this. It's got some of the similarities about human beings being created, but it's not for the reason you think. And then, it's actually very beautifully written, very poetic. We'll talk about. I'll usually usually usher them onto Gilgamesh. That's another talking point that comes up. Is Gilgamesh was this apparent giant? Another Nephilim. They'll start shouting that word out randomly. So yeah, I have come across it, but not in the waves that I thought I would. Which, as you said, knock on wood. Hopefully that doesn't start coming on, because I haven't got the energy to deal with it.
How people like King and Corpse, and I don't think that Digital Hammurabi has as much to do with that as well. I haven't seen any commentary of the sort. But like individuals like Dan McClellan, I've noticed that he gets a lot of that too, which is fascinating because while he's a scholar of the Bible, his bread and butter isn't in Assyriology or Sumerology. So I find it fascinating how he tends to be on the receiving end of that. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, yeah. Dan McClellan's. I love watching that guy's stuff. Yeah, and he does tend to get a lot of the. I actually comment on his stuff a lot when it comes to the Mesopotamian stuff, hoping he'll notice me. But you
We're all being
yeah,
fanboys.
he's great. I love that guy. But no, yeah, the Digital Hammurabi actually did an entire video. I'm not debunking the ancient aliens theory. Like they did a whole live debunking the whole thing. Like, well, not the whole thing, but the whole episode. Um, and that didn't really get any pushback, so to speak. But you know what? The biggest channels, and I shouldn't have done this, is I dipped my toe into. There's a very famous channel on YouTube which is actually quite good and entertaining. It's called the Y Files. I'm sure you've come across it.
Mhm. Yeah,
It's
I'm
actually
subscribed to that channel.
it's very well made, very really good storytelling, and he baits you in at the beginning, making you think he believes it, and then he kind of debunks it at the end. And I love that format. However, he did a video about um like ancient civilizations, and he mentions the Anunnaki. Of course, he did. Um, and he didn't really debunk it in the way that I would be sufficiently happy with, because he was just like, "Oh, some people have doubted Sitchin's translations, but blah blah blah," and it's like, "Come on, man! Like, this is actually quite bad that you, of all people, have left. Like, you'll have to Google it for 5 minutes." Anyway, so I commented on that one, and then I got a load of people commenting on that one, and I just turned the comments off. I was like, here's my I literally did a full breakdown of the electronic corpus of Sumerian literature. Here's the link for that. Here's the link for the Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative. Here's the link for the electronic, Pennsylvania Sumerian Dictionary. Here's all the legitimate academic sources, and you can go and read any of these texts that you want. You can even go and see pictures of the real tablets. Like, you can go and see them. None of it mentions this stuff that you're talking about. And I was like, people use the Nibiru thing, and I was like, Nibru key, silent key, is another name for Nippur, the city of Nippur. So I was just saying, like, linguistically, the Nippur thing, Nibru. This is what your people are getting mixed up on. It's like,
And it's also a name for the planet Jupiter.
yes, it is. That's what people are saying. That's what people are equating it to in the Sumerian text. But it's like the Sumerian text, in the context that people are talking about, it isn't talking about a giant planet hurtling towards us with alien beings on it. It's talking about, and that's why I would specify Nibru. Oh, sorry, yeah, Nibru key with the silent determinative. Let's the reader know that it's a place that the people are speaking about. Similar to how Dingir is a divine determinative that isn't spoken. The same thing happens with places. So yeah, and I saw a few comments coming in, and I was like, I'm not even going to entertain the rest of them. So I try and steer away from the Sitchiners as much as possible, because it's very tiresome way of thinking, and not as critical as they think they're being.
So, for all intents and purposes, you would consider yourself a Mesopotamian polytheist or spiritualist in some way. I'm wondering how that is interpreted in your own spiritual practice, in your day-to-day life, in your philosophy.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So yeah, I would consider myself a Mesopotamian polytheist. My focus is on the Sumerian aspect of it. But of course, the bigger picture is obviously, of course, what is important to me. Well, see, this is one thing that I really struggled with, getting into polytheism is, and I think and yourself actually had a brief conversation about this once, and it was about um, being able to sort of reproduce the practice in a modern sense without copying them. Like, because you can't do it. Essentially, it's not really doable in today's society. The one thing that I do nowadays is essentially, there's actually two altars at the side of me, and I have basically created my own version of spirituality based on what I think would the scribes likely possibly would have done. So I imagine I usually light a candle essentially to because in even in like my early days when I was into like spirituality and stuff, it was very commonplace to light a candle to sort of to kick things off, so to speak, to let them know you're offering them something, that kind of thing. And I think I read once in Sumerian polytheism. There's a book I read, and I think it mentioned Gibil, the god of fire, transporting offerings to the gods on behalf of like humans, like a messenger.
Right.
So I kind of use that as symbolic. The light, when the light comes on, or the oil burner comes on, that's the symbolic sort of opening, if you like. I'm letting you know I'm here, and this is what's going to happen. And then usually what I'll do is place a tablet that's usually been made that day or recently, and I'll read a prayer. I'll either read a prayer that I've already got that's written in Sumerian that I've constructed, and then in English, or I'll just read the tablet that I've made, which is usually a dedication tablet anyway. And it'll kind of follow that. It'll follow that path. I'll do the offering. I'll do the prayer, and then another thing that I like to do as well, and this is what I mean when I say I kind of follow how they may have done it, is I think I read as well that it was customary to donate food, so to speak, to the temples, and then they would give that out they would give that out to the people in the city. They would distribute that food, they would offer it, and then give it out to people as part of that ritual. So that's kind of what I do, is I offer food that's usually cooked, or it might be things like pomegranates or dates or pistachios, things that they may have actually eaten, or likely would have eaten rather. And and then it would be offered to my partner who also does the same thing. So like we sort of swap what she offers, I get what I offer, she gets to eat, and we sort of do that. And we have a little brass or bronze goblet as well that's filled with a libation offering and things like that. Um, but all these things are sort of markers or um, I don't know, just sort of like it's ritualistic. It's not if you don't do it in this order, it's going to go wrong. It's because, as I explained to you earlier, my belief system is that it is sort of a force that permeates existence in general.
Mhm.
So I don't think they're going to be very, annoyed if I didn't get in the bath before. I don't think they really care about things like that, to be honest. Um, but I do tend to think I do tend to like brush my teeth before I do a prayer as like a respect thing. But yeah, I'm not like, oh my God, I need to wear this robe. I need to do but that's the thing I used to get hung up on.
I can't remember who coined it, but it's something that I hear often, that perfection is the enemy of good. So if what you're doing is good enough and you're able to maintain that spiritual current, that spiritual connection, and there is meaning and there is enrichment and there is, growth, then keep doing it.
I feel like a big thing that gets overlooked when people talk about Mesopotamian mythology is how, I think I briefly mentioned it at the beginning, and it's that how fallible the gods are as well.
Hmm.
Like they are as clumsy and as nasty as we are sometimes. And that's what creates relatability. That's what makes, because the reason I mention this is important actually, because um speaking of people like Dan McClellan, is when they talk about the biblical stories, um one of the biggest arguments that I'm seeing from atheists and people alike is that God, God, just the one God, is he can't be all powerful, he can't be all this, why is he so bothered that people are gay? Why and then he kills all these people in Babylon, and he lets their men do horrible acts to women, and whatever. And this is what I'm saying. I sit and watch these debates um with like biblical scholars like Dan McClellan and Francesca Stavrakopoulou and things like that. I think to myself, that's because they're thinking of it in my opinion, the completely wrong aspect. Like you're thinking about God as literally a sentient human being with a human mind and morals and wants, sat in the sky or some ethereal plane, pointing and saying, "Oh, I don't like this guy because he's kissed another boy." It just, like, you're making God and the idea of God so silly, that he's getting wrapped up in human issues, that it's almost insulting
Hmm.
to what you would term a spiritual deity. It's insulting, in my opinion. Like like God, or the gods, deities, when you read about their myths, like Inanna, for example, it's unbelievably liberating. Like for example, Inanna is the goddess of sexual love. Not people just oh, I fancy this person, I love this person. No, she was the goddess of sex, like sexual love and passion and war, like that kind of animalistic passion that you get in both of those things. So that's why I feel like a lot of people relate to her. Like my partner, for example, the people look for that feminine energy to look at, and that's fine, that's okay. But then you got, thankfully, we've got text from like Enchedwana, when she's talking about like how terrifying she is, and she's able to destroy and like pummel the earth. And one of my favorite quotes from, like, it's actually mentioned in a few different Mesopotamian texts, but like just for ease, we'll say the descent of Ishtar, when she mentions that if she doesn't get her own way, then she will raise the dead so that they can outnumber and eat the living.
Hmm.
Like that is scary, man. And so even the Mesopotamians thought about zombies, which is like fascinating, isn't it? Um, I think the overwhelming point, what I'm trying to get to, is that Mesopotamian polytheism has allowed me to see and get closer to what I think deities really are, and I'm sure you feel the same. It isn't cut and dry. It isn't they don't. Well, there is no Bible in Mesopotamian mythology. There isn't a singular text that someone come and bring down and said, "There you go." It was split across thousands. I mean, what are we talking? We've got like 20 or is it over like 30,000 tablets that we have in like the British Museum, for example, and there's like 1% of them translated. Like
Yeah.
we are yet to find even a fraction of what the gods in their mind were capable of. So how do we expect us to understand something that they didn't really understand thousands of years later? It's, you know what I mean? It's just
Yeah.
like accept that you don't know and that you're on a journey through your life to find out what it means to you. So all these arguments about whether science and religion can coexist and whether aliens created us and for gold and all that rubbish, none of that matters. Like none of that. Those are the wrong topics to be talking about, in my opinion. Like, I don't know. What's your thoughts on that kind of thing?
Well, my thought is that if we're looking at the ancient people that we're trying to critique and deconstruct, we need to realize that to them, science, medicine, religion, magic, it's all part of the same system. There's no differentiation between any of those. And I think that the biggest issue that we have as, you know, as people that live in the West, have Western societal values, we tend to look to the past through that Western cultural lens. That everything has to conform to Western cultural values. We impose our conceptions of sex and gender and social
Mm,
hierarchy and social status onto ancient people. There's this issue, that it's called presentism. That's pretty much what it all boils down to. And I think that is the bane of of our existence if we're looking at ancient cultures and we want to look at them critically. um because there's so much stuff that's lost in translation. There's so much stuff that is subject to nuance. For instance, you cannot translate certain German terms or turns of phrase into English without losing the context and the nuance. So if that is, something that's difficult, then who's to say that translating dead languages like those of the Sumerian people, the Sumerian speaking people, there's so much there that still gets lost in translation. I can't remember specifically what the line is, but if you read the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Inanna or Ishtar, depending on whether or not you're reading the Sumerian or the Babylonian iteration, when she pledges her love for Gilgamesh and offers herself to him as his wife, the things that he tells her, are pretty cut and dry if you're looking at an English translation. But if you really dig into the weeds, as we may often say, and look at the original nuance and the context of what he is saying, like everything that he's telling her is pretty inflammatory. I think something to the effect of your the garden that you're promising is has been planted with skulls or planted with dead bodies. I think that was one of the iterations. So if you look at things that way and you look at the poetic structure and you look at the nuance and you look at uh, the actual meaning behind it, it's completely and totally mind-boggling of what we lose when we try to apply this modern Western sensibility and sense of morality. And I could go on and on and on, but I'm pretty sure that you and our viewers get the gist.
yeah,
In
definitely.
short, stop imposing Western cultural values on ancient cultures.
Correct. That is exactly my point. And that kind of feeds into what I was saying earlier about our interpretation as human beings on the gods, that we can't we will always do that, and I think that's a good way of, again, conceptualizing it and making sense of it in order to have any semblance of a relationship with it. But when it starts encroaching on things that just wouldn't matter, like, again, whether someone's gay or not, for example, or gender, like you say, like, that's when I have a problem with it, and it's like, come on, like, again, stop imposing, modern views onto ancient cultures. And I think it's really interesting when you see, because what you see when you read these texts is you're actually seeing a glimpse into not only the mythology, but also they were written usually as a reflection of the things that were happening at the time
Yeah.
in the actual culture. So, for example, I think I've seen this online with yourself speaking about it. Is like, 'cause and I was reading about this actually in Leo Oppenheim's book, Ancient Mesopotamia: Portrait of a Dead Civilization. Highly recommend. And it mentions about marriage, um, and being able to, it was like arranged marriage
Hmm.
essentially in Mesopotamia. It wasn't, there's the mythology of Babylonian uh, or marriage markets like Herodotus kind of put forward. It was like it was more like the dad or the parent chose who their daughter was going to be
Or
married
the elder
to,
brother too.
or the older brother. Yeah, like the male hierarchical figure would have a say in who this, and we see that, don't we? I think it's Inanna and the shepherd or something like that. She wants to marry the shepherd, but is given to DumuEnki
Yeah,
instead.
she wants to marry Enkimdu, who is the pastoral agricultural deity, and she goes on to say that he's going to give me flax and he's going to give me lettuce and pretty much all of the markers of an agricultural society. And Utu convinces her instead to pick Demuzid, and she does so begrudgingly. But then we have, this whole corpus of erotic poetry
Yeah,
and song where they're like, they
yeah,
clearly do more than just love each other.
yeah, exactly. So I I think that's important to say, isn't it? Like, you're getting a glimpse into the culture and how things worked, you know, uh, socially, economically, just everything. Like, and it's beautiful, it's fascinating. But um, this is why I feel like in order to have your own experience and have a relationship with any divine being or deity or however you want to coin it, um, you have to you have to take from it. Um, you have to take from it. I feel like you have to take what you read with a pinch of salt, because it's an ancient culture trying to make sense of something that well, I believe that they've been engaging with since the dawn of time. They've been engaging with something that's, you know, divine since the beginning. Um, so they've interpreted it as one way, and we, in a modern sense, will interpret it another way. For example, like things like disease and stuff, they believed it was like Udug or Utuku, the demons and things like that were inflicting disease, or the gods themselves. We modernly would say it's things like bacteria and stuff. But you could argue that that is a scientific term of the things that the god left behind. You can go into
Yeah.
that.
There's
I
an
like the
incantation, you brought up a good point. There's an incantation that pertains to sorcery or protection from sorcery. And what's fascinating is our conception of germs and disease and how these contagions are spread. Uh, there was this belief that if someone were to spit or whatever, release a bodily fluid onto the ground, if it wasn't covered, it was essentially used as a transmission of a curse to cause a disease. So yeah, that's pretty fascinating. Magical acts that utilized spit or mucus or what have you, whatever bodily fluid it was. We all know that these mediums, uh, you know, transfer. They are carriers for various pathogens and diseases. So yeah, it's
yeah,
fascinating that their conception of this transmission of disease, um, was understood as in magical medical
yeah.
means.
So I think going on to my next point, with all that in mind, is this adds a new layer for us as practitioners to understand how the gods have worked throughout the ages, and I feel like we can start to formulate an image of how they would really work, or how they could really work, um, if we look and don't limit ourselves to one particular religion. So, like, this is why I read about the Bible, and I'm sure you're interested in things like yourself and Satanism and all these other, Sikhism, Islam, everything that every culture has got this religion, and and their different relationships to the gods and things like that. And I think it starts for me to build a picture of how people have interacted with the gods over the years. Um, and I feel like we gain we shouldn't ignore it. Basically, we should take it. Like, I'm not saying that every religion is right per se, because again, everyone uses religion to say things that I don't think gods would really care about. But I do think on a spiritual, in a spiritual aspect, there's like a reoccurring theme that I feel like there's enough of that to gain a picture that everyone is kind of on the same level. Like, they believe that there's an energy that kind of governs the fates, or the governs the way things go, essentially, and that human beings can interact with it. I think that's, I think that's fascinating. And I think that's something that shouldn't be ignored, and actually I think should be celebrated.
Hmm. I
And that's
agree.
why I have respect for anyone who's religious, anyone, whatever creed you come from, whatever religion you're under. I have a respect for you, because for that reason, and that's why it's a shame when you see people bickering personally at each other. I don't like seeing that, and that's another reason I'm very thankful for people like Dan McClellan and biblical scholars, Digital Hammurabi, all of them, because they put so much time and effort to decipher these texts, and we can start to see how people interacted with the deities and things like that.
Hmm.
And I think it's great. I think that's something we should take on board rather than shun off and get rid of.
Yeah,
You
I
know what I
agree.
mean? Because, in like modern society, like, I watch a lot of debates, and in modern society, people usually blame things like religion for a lot of the things that go on in the world. And I think that's so unfair. And I think it's so I think people are missing out. Um, you know, and another thing I wanted to mention as well, which um is slightly off topic but just very interesting and fascinating, is that I was reading the other day that apparently Yahweh, or Adonai, as I think Dan McClellan says, had a wife. Was it Asherah? Actually,
Hmm.
had a wife and was a female deity, and I find that fascinating. Like, the 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 travel to monotheism, like, wasn't a short one, was it? It was like over time that
Yeah.
sort of eventually became monotheistic.
And
And
there's multiple reforms. You have, the worship of Asherah creeping back into the temple where her effigy is portrayed, and then, in the Book of Kings, one excuse me, where Elijah the prophet Elijah is essentially having his showdown with the prophets of Baal, where, the prophets of Asherah are present, but at the end of their, spectacle, when he orders the prophets of Baal to be put to the sword, the prophets of Asherah are right there. Nothing happens to them. So I think that was an iteration of, the pissing contest between suitors, and, oh well, Adonai got, came out as the victor, so he gets the spoils of war, and he gets to carry Asherah off to his temple. And
another thing that I think we maybe should touch upon, just out of interest for the listeners, is how, like, the intertextuality of Mesopotamian texts um throughout the years. So, of course, my favorite one to talk about is Gilgamesh.
My friend, I've had a dream. The mountain fell down on me, pressing me hard. A feeling of weakness wrapped my legs round. A fearsome aura overpowered my arms. A man like a lion approached me, shining bright in the land and most comely in beauty. Enkidu explained the dream to Gilgamesh. Now Humbaba, to whom we go, is he not the mountain, so strange as he is? If you and he meet, then but one is your task. The warrior's right, the task of a man. He will make rage his fury against you. Terror of him will wrap your legs round. But the man you saw was King Shamash, the sun god. In time of peril, he will grasp your hand. Gilgamesh climbed to the top of the mountain. To the hill he poured an offering of flour. O mountain, bring me a dream, so I see a good sign.
I think my most treasured is towards the end of the epic where he loses Enkidu, and he is, coming to terms slowly with the fact that his notion of immortality is going to be completely out of his grasp. And there's that pivotal moment where he is in the tavern at the end of the world, or what is perceived to be the end of the world, with Sidori, and she's telling him that, everything that you're doing right now, yeah, it's noble, but it's humanity's lot. It is our fate. It is, what the gods have decreed, that we are to die. And in this life that we have to find joy in the simple things, like being with our family, or being with our children, or having a life of honor and dignity, and possessing some sense of nobility regardless of our station in life. And that's something that has really shaped who I am now as I get older, as opposed to when I was younger. It was all about, oh, I love the power and the grandeur, and now I'm like, well, I'm gonna be 42 this year, and I'm gonna die soon. It's time for me to come to terms with that. And where do I want my remains to be buried? Do I want to be buried? Do I want to be cremated? Who is going to receive my who's going to be the recipient or beneficiary of my 401k and my life insurance policy? I mean, it's like all of these mundane things that really, were captured in this beautiful myth, this beautiful epic that, is one of probably the oldest known, I guess we could call it a meta novel,
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you've just said there. I think Gilgamesh, for me, is one of the pivotal moments in my practice, in terms of, like, it was the first composition that I read that struck a chord emotionally. Like, I thought, because it was like very metaphorical for the things that I've been through, like mental health, and I've been through a lot of things in my life, and I just think following Gilgamesh's sort of, his journey through the mount, like, for example, like when he sat on top of the mountain with Enkidu, or the multiple mountains, and he's having the dreams, and Enkidu's interpreting them for him. It's like very much like in that moment there, it's very much like a father and son, sort of like the son is like, he's having these dreams, and he's worried about things, and he's like, why am I scared? Why am I feeling anxious? Why am I worried? And he's taken on that sort of fraternal figure, or paternal figure rather, or fraternal, and and comforting him.
Yeah.
You're destined for this. This is good. This is what's going to happen. And I was seeing similarities in my own story, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
They stood there, marvelling at the forest, gazing at the lofty cedars, gazing at the forest's entrance. Where Humbaba came and went, there was a track. They saw mountain of cedar, seat of gods and goddesses' throne. On the face of the land, the cedar proffered its abundance. Its shade was sweet and full of delight. Through all the forest, a bird began to sing. Hen birds gave answer. A constant din was the noise. As the cedar casts its shadow, terror fell on Gilgamesh. Stiffness took grip of his arms, and tremors beset his legs. Enkidu opened his mouth to speak, saying to Gilgamesh, "Let us go deep into the midst of the forest. Let us get going and raise a loud cry."
Humbaba for me is like my father. And Humbaba didn't actually do anything wrong. But what I mean is, you know what I mean? He's like
Yeah.
such a sort of like monster guarding this forest, and he's like big and scary. And he made like the line in the play. Oh, it's not a play. In the line when it says something about Gilgamesh's, it makes his legs shake from underneath him, sort of thing.
Mhm.
Like his legs like turn to jelly, sort of thing. It just makes him shudder. And he's meant to be this heroic, like demigod, quite literally. Um, Again, resonates with someone like me. Like even the strongest or most supreme people feel that fear or
Yeah.
faced with it. And just because you feel that way doesn't mean that you're any less of a person. It actually means you are human. You're very much human, and you know he overcomes the bull of heaven. He overcomes Humbaba, and eventually, obviously like the kind of bit at the end when he's sailing back towards Uruk and he's kind of looking, I think he's saying to the person in the boat, isn't he, like, see, like, look at those walls. Do you see those walls? I
Yeah.
built those walls, and I'm not going to be able to live forever, but through this, what I've built here, my name will live on forever, sort of thing. And
Yeah.
that is, if that's not the most David Goggins thing I've ever heard, like, I don't know what it is. Like that was written like what 4,000 years ago or something to that effect, and they nailed it back then. I think like my point is these people were going through such hardships, arguably more than we do today in terms of like conflicts, because it was kind of like whoever came from the outside, like the mountain people, so to speak, or people on the outside fancied coming in, and they had more people, then you're probably going to get usurped. You know what I mean? You're going to be off the throne.
Yeah.
So bit more danger back then. So, and it comes out in the literature, is what I mean. It comes out in the artwork. Like, let's pay our homage to the Assyrian literature, and the Neo-Assyrian artwork was phenomenal, wasn't it? And it painted such a picture, and like again, I mentioned earlier on the Battle of Til-2, but the artwork that goes along with it, and you can see the detail in the regalia of Ashurbanipal, and the even the Elamites, and them being driven into the river Ulai and things like that. And it's just it's very modern, isn't it, in the sense that you read it, you look at it, and you realize how little human beings have changed at its core.
Yeah.
At our
Yeah.
core.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I
We're
think
still just as flawed now as we were then. Still just as barbaric now as we were then.
absolutely, absolutely, and I just think we kind of have an air of superiority nowadays as a collective society nowadays, don't we? When we look back at like ancient times and things like that, and we almost kind of put ourselves above them and up on, which we absolutely should not. And that's why I'm constantly celebrating. There's another reason why I do my posts, my historical posts as well, because I want to highlight, like, my favorite way of doing it is the proverbs. Like, you cannot say that these people were basic when you read some of those proverbs. Like, those proverbs are so poetic
Yeah.
and beautiful. Like,
And just as
and
relevant now as they were then.
absolutely, absolutely, because like they talk about all sorts of things, don't they? Like literally everything that you can think of, it's there. Like it's literally there. Um, and like when you read about like the Code of Hammurabi, which I managed to see a replica of that in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. And just when you see like Shamash at the top with
Mhm.
Hammurabi and giving him divine law, like as beautiful as that is, like if I was living back then with the mindset that I have now, and I'm sure people did say this back then, I don't doubt it. Like, when did he tell you that? When did Shaman tell you this? Where's the rod in the ring that he's apparently just put out? You know what I mean? Like, where is it? Like this is what I mean when this is the problem people have with religion, isn't it? Is like a theocracy, as you said back then. It was part of who they were. There was no separation of religion and state, was
Yeah.
there? They were the same thing. But now, when we look at it from our point of view, like what we see as barbarism, or what some people rather would describe as barbarism or barbaric, it was just the way of life for them. But we actually owe, I think I read this the other day, we actually owe our modern Western law concept to Hammurabi.
Yeah.
And apparently in the US Capitol, there's a photo of Hammurabi. There's a picture of Hammurabi in the US Capitol building as a homage, along with some other leaders and things like that, or lawmakers rather. So, we really do owe the foundation of a lot of things to the ancient Mesopotamians. And when we see how that area in the world now is being treated, it really does. It really just strikes a chord. You know what I mean? Like, I just think the what we're seeing at the moment. Like, I think I saw on the news today something about Iraq being struck by a missile by the US today. Apparently in retaliation. But regardless, why are we still like? Even I know there's a bit of bias towards Iraq because of what we're talking about, the Mesopotamian thing like that. But just why? You know what I mean? Like that is the cradle of our existence, civilized existence, that we have records of. Another big thing in my practice that I forgot to mention earlier is divination. We haven't touched upon that just yet. And so I use an oracle deck, which you'll be familiar with yourself, but for anyone listening, there's an oracle deck called the Sumerian Oracle deck, which is the only Sumerian divination tool I've been able to find online. I have seen the Babylonian Tarot deck recently, which my partner wants really bad, by the way. So I use that in my divination practices quite a lot. I remember getting a tarot reading recently saying that you're going to experience some quite big challenges. And then not long after, I found out that I was basically going to lose my job, and I had a month to find a job.
Oh, wow.
And then I got 2 interviews like back to back. And then I got another call saying that the job that you're leaving is it's still finishing, but there's another contract coming from it. Would you be interested? And I just felt like it's these real life examples that solidify my beliefs once again.
Yeah.
So there is apparently a ritual. I personally have never come across this ritual in terms of detail. I've only heard about it, and I think I've heard you mention before the descent of Inanna ritual, or there's supposed to be some sort of specific ritual associated with that descent. Could you maybe tell me a little bit about that, because I know nothing about it essentially, other than what I've maybe heard on the internet.
So there are various iterations of this. Some are enacted by, if I remember correctly, the reclaiming tradition that was founded by Starhawk. There are other groups that perform it. I know it. Interestingly enough, the symbology with the descent is also gained traction with members of the esoteric community that incorporate aspects of BDSM or are involved with the BDSM community. The rituals that I've led, however, do not hinge upon that. But I will say that, there is you're not descending as Inanna, because, her descent, if anyone is familiar with that myth, we would know that it was essentially her approaching the gates of the underworld as a military campaign under the guise of, going to mourn with Ereshkigal. However, in the course of these rituals, individuals are encouraged by way of guided meditation to give up certain aspects of themselves that they hold near and dear to them, as an interpretive means to identify with that particular part of the myth where Inanna is divested of various items of power. And it was pretty powerful. I was actually a participant in a ritual dedicated to the descent, and it was incredibly powerful. There was one instance where, after giving up all of the things that were essential to you, and encountering Ereshkigal, who was essentially portrayed by one of the ritual facilitators, another ritual facilitator who was pretty much serving as the gala demon of the underworld, escorted you to a certain part of the ritual space where you were to just sit and contemplate your death. And that to me was one of the most profound experiences, because I'm sitting there in the woods. It's completely dark. All we had in the distance was a bonfire, which you could just glimpse, but the path was illuminated by little lamps. But I'm just sitting there in this copse of trees on a tree branch. I can see the bonfire in the distance. I can hear voices, and I just thought, this is what it's like to be dead. Wow. I can see, I can hear. If I chose to interact, I could, but this is what it's like to be dead. And it hit me. It was so visceral that when the facilitator came to take me back to the trail so I could exit the underworld, if you will, I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay there, because in that moment where I'm hit with all these things, I just thought, I feel safe now. For once in my life, I feel like I'm in a safe space. Granted, that safe space was a state of symbolic death. So what does that say about me? That's probably something to talk about off camera. But yeah, it was just like being in the presence of that finality, and being in the presence of the very thing that we've all, at least in Western culture, have been led to fear. I thought that was a very profound experience for me. When I facilitated similar ritual, though, I'm not certain as to whether or not that type of experience is had by those participants that choose to share it. But I do know that it has affected individuals, so much so that they have crawled out of the ritual space on their hands and knees. They've left screaming and crying. So it really, I think what you get out of it is what you're bringing to it. And either you're having that cathartic release, or you are being faced or experiencing, or coming face to face with something that you were not expecting, because of the attitude and the mindset that you had going in. Oh, this is just going to be a self-empowerment thing. And really, it's a humbling situation where your life is completely turned around, and you were not prepared to be in the presence of a deity, or a manifestation or emanation of that deity.
Wow. So when you were in the death state, or when you were in that sort of state, did you have an experience with a deity, or was it more of a sensory experience, if that makes sense? Like, did you feel any presence, or anything?
I did feel a presence, but it was almost as though the interaction that I was having with that emanation, or that presence, or perception, whatever you want to call it, it was as though they were giving me space to come to terms with what was happening in the ritual. Um, that's the only way that I could describe it. Like they were there out of sight to ensure that while I was coming to terms with my symbolic death, that I
Mm.
wasn't going to uh, go off the rails and have a psychotic episode. But yeah, it was incredibly moving, and that was lightning in a bottle that can never be captured again, and just one of those many instances where during ritual where you have these profound transformative moments and you just look back on that and think, wow, that happened and it's
Mm.
affected me in this way. So yeah.
Amazing. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think, as you say, some people, that's an example, isn't it, of people who don't quite understand the power or the effect that being in the presence of something else can do to you. Or like if I experience that, like if I experience the dream that I had in real life, I don't know, that would be something else.
Your hair would turn white and you would run away raving mad.
Yeah, probably right, my friend.
Institutionalized somewhere.
Yeah. But
Or
see, that's the
surrounding
thing.
yourself with a cult and inscribing a new set of laws on clay. And
Oh my God. That's sort of like the dream, isn't it? No, I'm joking. Uh,
a pipe dream, maybe? No, that would be a nightmare for me, but yeah.
yeah, that would be horrific. Um, but I feel like that's what interests me the most about that experience for me as well, is that I'm actually terrified of water. Like open water, like the sea, it terrifies me. So the fact that the fact that I would deem my personal god, so to speak, as a water deity, or a
Mhm.
deity associated so strongly with fresh water or underground water, to be fascinating. And I feel like my whole, like if I was being written about now, or if if this was my epic, the whole thing would be about overcoming fear, the entire thing. And I feel like you know, I felt like that's what that dream was doing. Like I was being placed in water because you know it was. I feel like it was the Abzu is what I was in.
Mhm.
Like now, and that's what I mean by cosmic. It was like it wasn't just water. It was like it's water from something else. Like it was hard to explain, but that's what I'm because you've experienced it. I think you know what I mean. Um, but like sometimes it's those very experiences that I wish people who were atheistic would have, so
Yeah.
that they could understand how it would feel like. I think there's passages in the Bible that talk about um, not being able to look at deities, because you're sort of blinded or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And that's what I was saying earlier about not discounting stories from other religions because it can feed back into your own um, practice, and again, it feeds into my belief that we're all kind of worshipping the same entities anyway. It's just manifesting differently for different people, and people are calling it different things, and that's fine. That's just a given, isn't it? That's human beings are different.
As we approach the end of our time together, what other projects do you have? What would you like viewers and listeners to pick up on? Are there any projects that you're working on? A book that you're writing? More multimedia pursuits that you want to promote and plug?
Yeah. Well, I'd love to be able to write a book, but I don't think I have the attention span, unfortunately. So the the next thing that I will be focusing on, I'm doing a video, a mythological video, describing the figure Lamashtu, the demoness, the daughter of An, cast from heaven to eat babies, essentially, um, potentially for birth control reasons. That's what I'm going to be focusing on, my next multimedia brigade, so to speak. But I'm going to continue to do linguistic breakdowns from legitimate texts. I did one recently from the Curse of Agade and the Descent of Inanna, and I will be doing some more. I will be doing a tablet from the Descent of Inanna as well. So quite a lot coming up, actually. Yeah, stay tuned.
Excellent. Where can people find you?
So you can find me on Instagram at DumuEnki. And you can also find me on TikTok. At the at for that is sponsored by ASPD, so that's more of my personal, but it's essentially the same thing. But Dumu.enki on Instagram is like the main source, the main hub for all my information.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and elucidating on your experience and your passions and your pursuits. And I'm glad that you and I had this time to talk, and definitely sure that we'll have much more to talk about offline.